Beyond Two Souls just turned 10 years old. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look back at this game. I've actually played this game several times, and that should already kind of speak to the quality that I think this game has. I normally beat a game once, maybe twice. If it's one of my elite games, I'll go back here and there. I've played this game 3 to 4 times, and this time being the newest. And I gotta tell you, okay, I'm willing to fight you on this. I believe this is a great, great game. And I will say this, there is no revisionist history going on here. This is not a game or a movie where, it sucks when it comes out and then you look back at it 10 years later and you say, you know what, it's aged pretty well. It's actually a pretty good game. No, there's none of that here. In fact, I always thought this was a good game. And I think there's actually been some revisionist history going on, primarily because of David Cage. Now, look, we're not going to get into that kind of stuff, but I do want to throw out just that one little egg, that I do think the stuff that's happened behind the scenes with him and just ever since 2013, and I actually would say Beyond Two Souls was kind of the end of like the golden era, of him, where people didn't really say anything. But ever since then, obviously there's been a lot said, and I think the reputation of him and even Quantic Dream has really fallen since then. But I'm here to tell you, this game was always good. Okay, now I want to start out with my history of this game, and I want to dive so deep into this thing. Playing it 2 days ago, I beat it took me like 2-3 days, went through the whole thing. My wife watched along and she was commentating with me. We were having a really fun time. But this game came out in 2013, and I remember one very specific thing about this game leading into it, and it's actually that I thought this was going to be the better of The Last of Us versus Beyond. So I remember going into 2013, and while I wasn't on YouTube, I was around the internet, and Naughty Dog was doing something new, and they were doing something new, right? You had Heavy Rain, and I adore. That's another revisionist thing. I love Heavy Rain. It's always been good. Don't you dare tell me that it all of a sudden is terrible. I love Heavy Rain. So leading into 2013, I was like, oh my God, this looks good. And I remember like playing through this game, the different chapters, different parts to it. I would tell my wife, yep, that was in the trailer. Oh, I remember they showed the gameplay for that before the game. I just remember everything about it, okay? I was pumped. I thought this game was going to be really good. And when looking at both of them, I really thought this was like Sony's big, and it was a second party thing, right? Because they didn't own them. But I really thought, yeah, this is what's going to explode. This is what's going to make 2013 very, very special. Not The Last of Us. I thought The Last of Us looked a little bit more shaky. I was wrong. I was very wrong. I will say The Last of Us is a better game than this. I remember in high school, seeing the 10 out of 10s and all this stuff and saying, oh my God, I got it reversed. But look, I played the game when it first came out, and I really liked it. I really did. And ever since, I've always had high things to say, high praise. Look, one of the things that kind of happened when this game came out, the first big almost controversy, was the order. Okay, I really want to talk about the ordering of the chapters, because here's where I'm at. I play this thing the way that David Cage intended it to be played. To this day, I've played it 3, 4, maybe even 5 times at this point. I play the game not in chronological order. Now, I can see the draw to that. I think in some ways it would make it a stronger game, but in other ways, I think he wants you to kind of bounce around, and there's reasons that some young chapters are right after some older ones, or vice versa, and they kind of give you a peek at like, well, what did Jodie go through? And then we're gonna jump, like, she goes off with Ryan into the CIA, and then there's kind of a mission with that, and they've evolved, their friendship has evolved, or their relationship really has evolved, and it's put together like that for a reason. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily for the better, but that's how I play it. I've always played it the way the game does it, not the way of just going youngest to oldest. But I do get it. I understand that that's some people's preference to playing this game. Okay, so we got the game itself. Well, what do I think about the game? Well, I think visually, this game still holds up actually quite well. Everybody still looks really darn good, and even like matching. Okay, you can't fool me into thinking the game came out in 2023, but it doesn't look all that old. I think I was playing the PS4 version, which I believe came out a few years later. Came out PS3 2013. I think 2014 or 2015 was the PS4 version. So I'm playing a slightly modified version of it. I would say there's a couple of things that have gotten, not old, but like probably never worked, and they still don't really work now. The walking look, I remember Heavy Rain, so I remember the jankiness of walking and the camera just having a lot of trouble with figuring out, when you reach a certain part of the room, the camera angle will switch. And this game does it too, but this game is so much better than Heavy Rain in terms of the movement. It is not great. I would not call it great. I wouldn't have called it great back then. I really think Detroit Become Human is when they figured it out. And there's still some jankiness always in the walking, and it's basically the thing with trying to turn around, right? Where sometimes they just don't understand. Your character won't figure out that you're trying to turn them right. They'll spin around and the camera will get confused and they'll switch to a different camera angle. That was never all that good, and it's still not good now. The other thing the one thing that made me just furious, almost in a laughing way, I literally would laugh it off. The Quicktime events, look, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Quicktime events. I've said it before on this channel. Yes, did it go too crazy in the late 2000s, early 2010s? It sure did. It sure did. But you know what? I prefer it over, I actually really appreciate what they were going for here. And what do I mean? Well, it's momentum-based. So if Jody is swinging this way, you would do the appropriate, you would technically go right. Oh, I'm trying to replay some moments I'm thinking about on top of the train or just fighting groups of enemies. Look, there are times where I would do really well. I would nail 6, 7, 8, 9, Quicktime events in a row. And it would be glorious. And I actually think when it's pulled off, when you're doing it, you feel, yeah, she's blocking low. She's going for a block to the knee. Okay, you go down, right? That makes sense. Down and up. Down and up make a lot of sense when she's trying to do it, but left and right, oh my, I get my wires crossed, and I cannot figure out sometimes. I swear when she's moving in one direction and I do it, and then the game tells me, no, that was wrong. It's well, why in God's name would I do it in the other direction? And then, makes that weird, clicking sound, lights up red, and then she gets just, bashed. She gets destroyed, in that scene. And, again, playing it present day, I laugh it off. I laugh it off primarily because I know the story. I know the different, iterations. I know nothing can really happen to her. The ending, it can if you truly mess up, unbelievably bad. But, if you mess up in a fight in this game, it's not really, in fact, no, not really. It's not going to come back to haunt you. So I did get frustrated, and again, in terms of what has aged well versus what maybe was never good, I'm a fan of Quicktime events. I'm a fan of Heavy Rain's Quicktime events. Give me that. Honestly, give me that. I'm really good at them, and I'm still good at them now. I was good at them when I was a teenager. I'm still good now. What they were trying to do here, again, I appreciate it. I will give them credit because it was different. It was weird, but at the same time, I get it. It's about her movement. And really, they take that and they put it into the gameplay as well, right? Because there'll be that dot. Here's the thing, though. You can't really see the dot. Another slight issue with this game. Sometimes you can't see where the dot is, and then you'll reach, forward with your analog stick, and she'll sometimes do it, sometimes not. So everything's about positioning where the white dot is, where her body is moving in combat or moving away from in combat. Those are the things you got to be aware of right when you do the Quicktime stuff. I wouldn't say that's great, but yet again, when you pull it off, it's actually quite fun. It's quite cool to look at. So in terms of the gameplay, you have that. In terms of the decision making, I think it's really good. There's things obviously they push in this game, but they give you a fair amount of leeway in terms of what you're doing. Look, I have played this game a lot, and I've watched different versions of what can happen. There were still things. There was a couple moments in this game where I looked to my wife and I said, I didn't either remember that or I've never seen that scene before, ever. Because I just did it a different way. And, you have Jody and you also have Aiden. And, I like going on a rampage. So anytime they let me wreck and if Jody was mad, I as the player would say, okay, it would make sense for Aiden to be mad. So I'm going to destroy everything. And I would do that. But, sometimes I held back. The dinner date with Ryan, I actually played it very, very nice as Aiden. And I think that's really, really cool because it's choice-based, and it's obviously, the decisions will play out, but it's not just the physical. It's not just Jody who's making these decisions. Sometimes you got to do both, and I actually think the handoff between one and the other, without even the story, this is just the gameplay, I actually think it works really well. Sometimes if you're not supposed to play as him and you press triangle and she'll say no, you can't do that, or, I don't need you here. It's it's cool how they talk to each other. Or you're Aiden, and, oftentimes, especially recent times, right? People sometimes get mad with, like, the game kind of helping you out where, they give, like, the puzzle clues too quickly, like in God of War's case, etc., right? This game, again, I think it does it really, really well because they're talking to each other, but only Jody, like, understands Aiden, right? So if you're Aiden and you're kind of confused on where to go, she'll say, like, hey, check over there, or I'm going to need, like, help. Oftentimes, she doesn't say please. My wife pointed that out. Jody really does not say please all that much. She really just kind of demands things of Aiden, but because of that, I actually think there's a really good handoff where you're told what to do kind of interchangeably, and I think it works really well from the gameplay side of just knowing when to switch from one to the other to complete something. And again, oftentimes there'll be more than one situation, or there'll be more than one way of handling something, or you don't have to handle it at all. For example, again, sometimes when you can, like, rage as Aiden, I think of, like, the birthday party where I always go just, like, full-on demon ghost, where I light the place on fire and I, hurt everybody and all that stuff. I've done that every time. There's never been one time where Jody just leaves. When she gets out of the Harry Potter stairs, she goes, or Aiden goes, and he wrecks, right? And I'm never going to change that. So I think it's really clever. I really do. As for the story and the acting, I think there are two parts that are very much worth talking about. Acting, I think, is phenomenal. I really do. Jody sometimes can be a little off, and it's like, you wonder about, like, the direction, but I do feel it was the direction. I think, Ellen Page at the time, obviously Elliot Page, I think he does an incredible, I really do. I think it's very well acted. I really like Jody the character, and that goes more into the story. And even I was telling you earlier, like, when Jody is upset, I get upset. And then they let you play as Aiden, and he'd be upset, so then you, like, wreck. And I think it plays that really well, but also just some of, like, the themes that they touch, again, like, that's why I don't love, like, the revisionist thing with this game. Like, there's obviously, like, the way David Cage reportedly, like, treats people, or the way the studio itself treats people, but, the story behind this game, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody and I don't know if it was, like, his dad or his parents, but somebody very close to David Cage had passed away, and that's really how he came up with the idea of this game, this thing that's entity, right, that's linked to you. And I think it works so well. I think this game is very emotional at times. The like, the parents that kind of adopt her in, and how mean, like, the father is, and dropping her off, and how Willem Dafoe, right, Nathan, is so good to her, and then he loses his family, and there's just a lot of emotion. Now, I will say, there's probably more emotion because you kind of feel really bad for Jody, and obviously so much is happening for her. You feel that in kind of like the first half, so like the younger sections, maybe not necessarily first half of the game, but in the later stages of her life that you play in this game, there's some cool parts too. I remember growing up, okay, when I first played this game, one level I really hated. In fact, the only really big arc I hated was the Navajo one. And I told my wife, leading into playing this, I was like, I've never liked, but it's been a while. I mean, it's been probably at least 6 years since I played this game, maybe even longer, right? So I was like, okay, I know I hated the Navajo mission. I don't know why. I think I felt it was boring back in the, like, when I first played it, right? So when I was like 16, 17 years old, I guess I thought it was boring. But, playing it now, the Navajo mission's fine. I don't think it's, like, amazing, but I like it. I've always liked the homeless section, arc. I thought that was really cool. The CIA thing, I will say, in terms of maybe revisionist stuff, the whole child thing, like, it is impactful when you realize, him and his dad and all the people that are no longer with us in that room. And, like, that's definitely something that hits home with Jody, and then she has to, escape in, like, crazy fashion. For the kid, and, like, you're basically fighting side by side with him, and he has a weapon, and I don't think that would work nowadays. And I don't really care, but I have, like, that sixth sense where it's like, you show that to a modern audience, there's no way you're gonna get, like, that mission would get torn apart nowadays, and even if you're talking about it, I'm sure it would get torn apart. I didn't mind it, but I would say the CIA stuff in general was probably some of the weakest stuff. And the only other thing that I would say was weak about the story, because really, like, I like the chapters. I like how they break them up. I think there's plenty of emotion. You could argue like they kind of lose like the central plot a few times. I think that's because they bounce around. So that would probably be one negative to jumping between her lives or different, portions of her lives. It's like, she's on the run and then she's homeless and she's in the CIA and it's the first day of she's doing experiments with Nathan. It's like you're jumping around a lot and she's got the teen emo phase, right? Like I think each of them on their own is really cool. And I think like the difference of level design, I guess, right? Like what you're doing in each level, I think it's really clever. Even some of like the simplest levels. There's one of them, I think, where the parents leave and you could choose to, choke the dad. That's it. Like I believe that's the entire mission is they say goodbye. It's a cutscene. They say goodbye to you. They walk out and you don't even have to choke him if you don't want to. And that's the end of the mission. And I think that's a great chapter in the game, and I think it serves the purpose. You feel really bad for her. It establishes where she's gonna be. Like it's fine, but again, like the plot sometimes get lost, and obviously like the condenser with the entities, that's a big thing that's kind of reoccurring. I would say one of the primary, maybe the only primary weakness with the story would be Nathan switching like at the very end, and it's like you never you saw him as Jody got older. You saw him when she was like a teenager, and you saw him when he let her go, right? And you never really saw that side of him. Now, I like what they did. Like, I like the idea that he traps his family, and he's, they're screaming, and he doesn't really realize it. He thinks they're kind of reaching out to him, and like, I could understand where he's coming from, and they did a good job in the earlier chapters of showing like what that did to him. He was very sad. He was lost, when they possess Jody and she talks to him and, all he wants is to bring them back. Like, let's keep talking. Like, you feel that. You definitely, and I think Willem Dafoe crushes it. I think he's probably the best in the entire, really. I think Jody's a great character, but I think Nathan is maybe even better and probably the best character. He does so well. However, I think to just add like one kind of wrinkle, like Jody's going to get wiped out with the drug that happened to the mom, and that's a big part. And you could argue like that would be it. Like you could probably leave it there with her escaping and be fine. Instead, he has to do this kind of not evil switch, but where he's like, well, I need to see them. And then when they possessed her, they yelled at me and said to stop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to like destroy this in between, and we're just going to like, mold together the afterlife or this like world in between with these spirits and then us. And it's like, bro, like why? Why would you ever think that's a good idea based off anything you've ever done? And obviously it goes terribly. But I like the endings. I've done pretty much the same ending each time, but I've always like looked like I know what the after, or like if she chooses death, right? Or beyond, I believe it's called. When she does that, I've seen those endings. I think they're cool. I always choose life, and then sometimes I go by myself, alone. This time I chose Ryan. And I feel like that's just the game really wants you to pick Ryan. That is technically like the best ending, along with like keeping everybody alive. To which I only lost one, the father in the Navajo tribe. That was a mistake. That was on me. But I did almost the best ending. I generally, like I said, pick like the same thing. But I like how it ends. I like the character arc that Jody has to go through. I like. I don't know like if you could see it coming, the twist with her and Aiden, and like knowing it, you can kind of, I guess, like tell, and there's a couple hints throughout the game, but really not too many. I can't remember like my reaction to it the first time. I'm sure it was probably shock, but I like that. I like, the protective kind of brother, right? And then he died, at birth, and he's just always been there, with her, and that's why they have that connection, and that's also why that even after all of the stuff at the ending happened, he's still able, and I love it. I really do. I like the ending like so much where he's there, and, the coconut or whatever it is rolls to her, and then, he writes still here in the sand. I always remember, I told my wife, like, I think he writes something, like I know he comes back, he writes something, and still here. So I really like this game. I could talk about it even longer, but I'll hold on to it. There's one other thing with like the Ellen Page at the time, the Ellen Page and Ashley Johnson and Ellie and Jody thing. I kind of want to make a video just all on its own talking about the history there, because that was such a big, remember like the faces being so similar and they had to change it. And I mean, I remember that too. And I want to talk about that kind of like a history video. There's a lot with this game, but I'm dead serious. I've always liked this game. It's not better than Heavy Rain. I've always thought Heavy Rain is like, but you know what? I really like Detroit Become Human. I liked it a lot. And I played it years after. I think I played it 2 to 2.5 years after it first came out, Detroit Become Human. And I really like it. But, of these three, Beyond is probably the weakest. Like, Detroit has some really good moments. It also has some really bad moments. I don't think the gap is as big with Beyond. I think it does have really great moments. It doesn't really have any massively terrible ones. I think it's a little bit more consistent. I might say it's the third. Like, I'd rank it 3 out of those 3, but also could be my second. But you know what? It's just always been a good game. Like, I've always enjoyed it. And I was looking up games, that came out in 2013 to do like a 10-year, video on the channel. I saw this. They celebrated on Twitter. They did Twitter posts, and it's like, yeah, I always liked it. I played it again, and I kind of kept it in my mind where it's like, yeah, I know it's not universally loved by any means. In fact, it's kind of viewed, I believe, online as kind of mediocre. I feel like that's the general sentiment about this game. And so I went in not like thinking that, but like thinking in my head, okay, like is there anything to that? Because I've always liked it. I never thought it was average. I always thought it was really good. Not as good as The Last of Us, because you played The Last of Us first, chronologically when these games came out. But I remember always liking it, and I just feel like as time has gone on, people have liked it less and less and less, to the point of maybe not. But I think a lot of that does have to do with David Cage and the stuff kind of behind it. And that's, fine. You like him or dislike. I don't care. I truly don't care. I'm here to talk about the games. It is an important part of the whole history, so that's why, we had to talk about it. But I could really care less as long as people are being, treated fairly. Like, that stuff definitely needs to happen. But I think the opinion of this game has fallen because of that. And I don't really think that's fair, because the game's not bad. And I think it's actually really good, better than most give it credit for. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.